Alrighty, so what I wanted to show you guys today in Blender was how to do retoppling, right? Retopologizing. Now, because of the interesting circumstances that we're in this year, I don't really kind of want to do full retoppling of like a character face, so we're really just going to use it more to kind of build some clothing and armor. And we'll just kind of do normal box modeling stuff for the face, kind of some extrusions to create eyes and mouth and all that stuff. But this can actually be used with sculpting to retopple even body parts, right? So if you want to do some really crazy head or body with some sculpting, that is something you could do, and I normally would do in the class, but since we're doing the distance learning, it might be a little trickier this time around. But in this case, I still want to show you guys how to use retopo tools. Not only can they be used for clothing and armor, which is what we're going to use for them on this project, but like I said, you can even rebuild parts of your character that way, right? So if like you wanted to sculpt a really interesting, unique head, and you didn't know how to box model it or just use extrusions to get it, it might be one of those things where you get at this stage and then you kind of just turn on the sculpting, which we'll see later this term, sculpting one right there, and we could sculpt and just kind of turn up the resolutions to much higher levels, do a lot of sculpting on it to just shape the form. And that may just be a little trickier for some of you guys right now. If some of you guys have that experience and have already played with it like you were here last year, hey, go ahead, try it, right? But I'm going to keep it a little bit simpler since there's a lot of newer students and stuff like that, and we're doing it in Blender and the distance learning. So I'm going to kind of not really sculpt any of the major body parts and then retopple. We'll do some sculpting later on, but it'll just be more for high frequency details than for actually primary forms. So we're just going to do it for kind of sculpting and stuff like that. So for clothing and armor. So what we're going to do here is really we need to understand that we want to be in our modeling layout right here. And we can see that there's a poly build tool right here. And this kind of basically gives you kind of your retopo tools, right? We'll be able to play with that a little bit and show it off. And I'll probably come back and maybe do a little more with it in another video later this week. We've got plenty of time to build this character, sculpt this character, paint this character. So really this week's probably going to be 2 videos about how to use retopo tools to build clothing and armor. And that's what kind of we're going to focus on for this week, for the couple of videos we do this week. And then when we get to next week, we can start to do videos for the face and kind of fine-tuning details. UV and wrapping will take a couple of videos, and maybe 1. And then we can start to show sculpting tools and some basic painting tools. So really, in this case, what I want to do is it actually tends to be a little easier to kind of get some geometry already started, right? You can actually create a whole new primitive for this, but oftentimes you have geometry that you can already use on your mesh, and this is a great way for me to show this to you. So of course we can hit 3 for faces, right? Remember, it's up here. So remember, Blender, when you get used to it, it's actually quite user-friendly, and particularly when you turn on industry standard, it does a lot like Maya already. But remember, when you first come in, if you want to switch to objects 4, and that'll allow you to go to different objects. Once you've clicked on an object, you can hit 1, 2, or 3 to go to the vertex, edge, or face modes. Of course, those buttons are right there. And even right here, the edit mode actually has those in there. See, object mode, edit mode, kind of sculpting mode. So that little kind of mode menu kind of gives you some cool access to stuff there. So in this case, what I want to do is I want to select some faces. So we're in face mode. 3 is the quick key for that. And I'm going to hit tab because that was the quick key I've set to my circle select, right? Remember, if you just hold down left mouse button on the very top kind of selection tool here, that's where your tweak tool, your regular kind of select box is, and select circle is your drag select, right? So they're right in there. And in this case, I'm just going to kind of left click drag if I wanted to. But here's the thing. If you just kind of select the face, and then you shift double click on a face next to it, it selects a face loop, right? So you can actually do face loops quite easily in Blender just by doing that, right? So I can just shift, and then shift double left click there. So basically what you do is you just, you select the face, and then you shift double click on the face next to it, and that will give you a loop, right? So if I just shift left click and then shift left double click again, boom. You see how it does face loops? Of course, if you hold down Control and left mouse drag with select on, you can kind of just deselect what you don't want, right? So maybe we don't want all of these. But I just want to show you that there is actually a pretty cool, remember, Control subtracts, Shift selects, or adds. And of course, like I said, if you select the face and then shift double left click on the face next to it, it selects a face loop, right? and that's actually kind of cool. If you do want to do select connected, there is a quick key for that. It's the kind of bracket, right? If we go to select here, select linked, it's kind of that little bracket key. It's kind of by your kind of enter key and backspace keys. You can just look for the bracket one. But there is select link, and that is actually select connected, all right? All right, so in this case, I've got those. Now, if I right click, I'm not really gonna get the options I need, right? A lot of really useful ones are here, but not everything, right? So sometimes you actually need to go to the mesh menu. And you actually see there's a quick key for it, Control D for duplicate, right? So in the mesh menu, I'm just gonna duplicate. And it's initially gonna give me a little bit of geometry, so I'll move it a little bit and then click to make it finalized. And you'll see that there's actually now geometry there, right? And so if I click and then I do that the bracket, right? So it selects linked, right? So select menu, select linked is how I kind of did that, right? You just can kind of select on a face, right? That's kind of on the separated geometry there. And then select menu, select linked, it's right there. It's kind of that back bracket, and that selects the linked ones. Now in this case, we copied those, but they're not a separate object yet. So you can actually copy and leave those in the same object if you wanted to. Which is actually kind of cool, right? It's a little more like Modo than Maya in that respect. But if you did want to fully separate it, you can go to the mesh menu, and there is an area called separate. And you say you can do separate selection, right? So initially I just selected the face I wanted to duplicate, whatever way you want to do that, right? You can just drag select with, or circle select in Blender. If you do left click and then shift double left click on a face next to the face you already selected, it'll select the face loop. And then we just duplicated those. Now they're separate polygons, but they're still the originals there, right? It's not, it's like edit mesh duplicate faces in Maya instead of extract. But we still need to separate it properly. So in that same menu, just below, several below duplicate, like I said, is separate selection. And you'll see what that does, it actually separates it into its own object, right? So remember, kind of in the top right corner here, this is kind of like Blender's version of Outliner, right? You have eyeballs here, so you can kind of turn off the visibility off and on of these things, kind of select which is going to be the active one, right? Of course, if you hit 4, right, that puts you into object mode also, and you notice how you can kind of click on objects here instead of having to go to your kind of scene collection, kind of, I can't remember what they call it in Blender, but it's basically it's equivalent of Outliner, right? So any of your objects are in there, lights and cameras are in there. But of course 4 is object mode, and that'll allow you to go between your objects. And then of course I can hit 3, and now you see that this is a fully separated object, and we could do kind of our own unique stuff to it. So it is a couple of step process, right? Mesh, duplicate the specific faces so that they're copied, but then we want to go down, you know, after we've selected those again, and go to separate selection. So it'll actually truly take that selection of copied polygons and make them their own object. Now, once we've done that, one of the things we can actually do is make sure that that's the active object, which it is, right? And like I said, 4, you know, that lets you kind of select the objects right here instead of having to go there. And then 3, of course, puts us in face mode. You'll notice that there is kind of up here, this is what looks like a magnet, right? And we know that in Maya, magnets usually indicate snapping tools. So I can click on that to make it active. You'll notice right next to it, if we click on the little kind of, in this case it looks like a white box, but if we click on it, you'll see there's actually several options. Vertex, edge, increment, right? So we can kind of pick different options. In this case, we'll use face, all right? So there we go. And you say you can snap to center of a face and edge. This is kind of one of the things Maya can't do that 3D Studio Max and Modo can do. So you kind of have some kind of neat kind of things right there. You know, you can have it snap to the closest thing on the target, active. By default, this should work fine for us. Of course, if I wanted to, we could just select some faces on here, move them around a little bit, just kind of do snap align. In that case, it's kind of tweaked a little bit more than we wanted it to. And you can always turn it off, right? It's one of those things you can kind of turn off and on as you work. If you just want to kind of pull some of these out just a little bit. There we go. But you see we've kind of already started to create basically some kind of pulled off geometry here, right? So this kind of gives us a start for the clothing and armor we might want to do, right? But what we can also do, particularly when the snap is on, right? So it's that magnet, and then I just kind of made sure to pick faces. There is something called polybuild here, right? It's in the modeling menu. It's kind of part of these ones over here. It's called polybuild. And what this is going to allow us to do is you'll notice you can kind of go over vertices and it can kind of snap to edges as well, right? And what we can do is we can left click drag, right? And what this does is it's kind of an extrude border edge out. But we can just keep dragging that edge, right? So we just kind of keep clicking on that edge and it pulls. Now you might see it pulls a little weird, so you can go over the vertices and kind of move those around a little bit. All right, and that'll kind of snap them a little bit better as it works. And of course we can go back and tweak and adjust those later on, right? But this is going to allow us to do these things. Now, one of the things you'll notice is that if we go over to the kind of, it's kind of like Blender's property menu. It's kind of below here. It's this one, right? We often have our modifier on for that kind of stuff. And you can see the modifier is on for smooth preview for these objects also, right? But you'll see there's kind of an orange one, right? Kind of an orange one. And this brings up kind of these cube properties here. And one of the things we can do is we can kind of open up the viewport display area and we can say in front, right? And what that'll do is it'll actually show the currently selected object, right, which is the clothing, in front, right? So kind of remember there's all these cool little options here, and we're kind of starting to explore and show them to you more. And that's going to make it pretty easy for me to kind of make little adjustments. You see how we can kind of tinker with that a little bit more, bring these down. I do think that the retopo tools in Blender could still use a little bit of love, but overall they're not bad. They're fairly solid. This is definitely an area I feel Maya's a bit better. But as you see, I can just kind of grab on the edges, and I can just kind of go back and move the vertices. And you see, because that snap with faces is on, that's snapping to the face. And we keep extending these out, right? So you see I just kind of move it until I see the blue edge, right? And we just keep kind of dragging this out. And you see we can kind of basically draw some kind of armor or clothing on this body here, right? And of course, like I said, we can go to the vertex modes here to kind of tweak them a little bit more. There we go. It'll kind of snap it better to the surface. And it might not be exactly perfect. That's okay, we're eventually going to thicken this, but it's generally holding up pretty well to what we want it to do, right? So there we go. But remember, it's the poly build tool right here, right? We want to make sure magnet and kind of face is on. Of course, we selected some faces earlier, and we did that duplicate, right? And then we selected those faces, and in the same mesh menu, we separate selection. And that made those into their own object here. Of course, we hit 4 to go to object mode and selected the kind of clothing object, right? Armor could be whatever you want it to really be. And then we kind of pull that, you know, made sure that that was the active one, right? So that way it'll snap to the thing below it, right? And then just, you know, made sure to click on the little kind of orange square one right here. And that opens viewport display, right? Let's click on that triangle and then just turn it in front on it. It makes just kind of this work a little bit better, right? So we can just kind of keep grabbing those edges and kind of bring them down. Kind of keep them going here. There we go. All right. So just kind of some interesting things there. You'll notice that if we go into kind of the extrude cursor normal, we can kind of see that we have a few of those options there if we want it to be available. Obviously, if we want, we can go to tool properties, right? And you'll see that there is kind of some options in here. So if we go back up to the kind of ones that look like tools, since the poly build's active, you see how it's creating quads. We can technically have it doing mirror on, but since we already have the mirror modifier, we don't have to worry about that. And there's an auto merge feature, right? And you can kind of turn up that threshold if you want to a little bit. Sometimes I found it's a little weird. There we go. It's a little picky, right? But you'll see eventually it'll kind of work its way around there. There we go. Like I said, it's not really the best retopo tools I've seen, but they're not bad. But the poly build itself, you know, you can have create quads on. All right, so when you activate it, you can always make sure that that's kind of available and on. I think it is by default. You might want to turn auto merge on and give it a bit of the threshold, right? Never hurts to kind of have a little bit of a threshold there. So remember, you can kind of always open up a few things here and just kind of see what's going on in there. So that gives us some kind of auto merge functionality, right? And then of course we can come up here and we can just left click drag, and let's kind of pull that out a little bit. If we want, we can grab that vertex, kind of bring it in there closer. Come on. Should be able to bridge it together for us. Come on, merge it. Sometimes it's a little wonky, and mind you, I'm far from an expert at everything, Blender here. And we could always do bridging if we needed to as well, right? We really have some options available if we want to for how we kind of rework and build these things. So this is just kind of giving us some poly build options, right? If we need them. You might even create quads off, and then it'll still try to create quads the best it can, but it might kind of merge some stuff a little bit. So just keep that in mind as you're playing around with this. We do have these features, and they can be useful for adjusting some of these forms for us to stick to the surface. Kind of bring that out a little bit, bring these back in a little bit there. Ooh. And you're going to be a little careful, right? It's, like I said, it's not the best retopo tools I've ever used. It's kind of one of the areas I kind of feel like Blender still needs a bit of work at. As much as I'm quite pleased with the general modeling workflow now, and I think it holds up pretty well compared to Maya, I feel like retopo is definitely an area that it's got features, but it could probably be a little bit more robust. So you see how we can kind of easily kind of build to there. If we wanted to, we could always kind of go back to our regular selection tools, right? Maybe hit 2 for edge mode. And we could always just quickly select some of these edges, right? Or even just kind of select these 2 edges right here, right? And if we right click, some of our options in here are things like bridge edge loops or bridge edges, right? And you see how that just bridges those edges? And then if we wanted to, we can grab that edge loop there, right click, and of course we have fill, right? Note that the fill does kind of fill with those triangles, so you might want to just, after you've filled, you may go to 2 for edges, or click on that again, delete, dissolve edges, kind of dissolve that out of there. Sometimes if your shading's a little weird on that, remember you can just go to face mode again, right click smooth shade on that, will just kind of smooth shade it. We said we could kind of easily kind of rebuild part of that there. And then we can even use things like our tweak tool. Snap to faces is still on, so if we wanted to tweak kind of some burts or some edges, those will actually still tweak and snap to the surface. So you can keep that snap faces on and still kind of go back in here and adjust some shapes and forms, right? And you see what that does? That starts us to give us some basic kind of clothes that we can kind of build up here, right? And that's kind of cool. That's kind of neat. So retopo can kind of be pretty useful, right? You can actually draw stuff on existing meshes with that snap. The poly build kind of lets you do kind of this extrude feature just automatically right off the surface, which is kind of cool. It does come with some of its little drawbacks, or I just need to get better with it. But I haven't really noticed that many options, so I kind of feel like it's not bad, but it's kind of definitely one of those things could be a bit better in Blender. But you see how it really is a decent starting point for this, and how we can build stuff up, right? And so like I said, if we wanted to, we can kind of go back to poly build again, right? So let's click on poly build, and remember, if you're on the kind of the properties, you can see the properties for this. If you click on that one, you can kind of see, you can turn that in front on, which kind of helps a little bit there with those. And I could easily just kind of grab this edge, bring it down some more, right? It's cool because it's a quick, easy kind of extrusion out feature that we have. There we go. And remember that snap and then the face option on, it's going to snap fairly well to the actual surface, right? We can bring that down, and we can keep grabbing vertices to tweak them a little bit. There we go. Like I said, we could always try to kind of get that merging to work. Like I said, I felt it's a little bit cranky, so I'm not sure if I'd fully really trust that merging there. I just feel like it's not always the most reliable. So you might even just say, like I said, prefer to kind of just turn regular selection tools back off and then do things like, kind of 2 for edge mode, select your edges, right click, bridge edge loops. And you notice that bridge edge loops automatically kind of, particularly if it's just a single row, it'll automatically weld that edge up there. So you don't necessarily have to fill. But it gives you a really strong start And then of course with the tweak tool still on, we could always come back in here and tweak some stuff still in the mesh because snap face is already on. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some more of this in a second video so that you'll get to kind of see me doing more of it, right? And we'll eventually thicken it, and that's really what the kind of videos are going to be like for us for this week. Just showing you guys how to start to get clothing and gear and stuff like that. So in this case I can turn that off if I want to, and like I said, 4's object mode, so you can go back to your original object and work on that. If you want the in front stuff off, right? Remember, just go back to kind of here, and make sure to click on the active object, right? 4, and then you say you can kind of turn that off. So remember, this is kind of like your properties for the object itself, and you can turn in front off and on for that object depending on how you're seeing it, how you're working with it, and all that stuff. Alright, so that'll probably be a great place to stop for us. Save control. And like I said, we'll do some more this week. So I'm going to keep using this. You can see me do it a couple times. But I want to get you started exploring that.